Go.
Okay, all right. I'll officially call the CCS Northwest meeting to order. Okay, continue your discussions.
Okay, my order's prime rib, baked sweet potato, green beans, and Don Perignon.
You didn't say what year you wanted it, did you?
No.
Just as soon as we tax the billionaires, we can arrange that. Okay, we had some discussion. It might actually be in the transcript because I had turned on transcript early, but it won't be in the recording per se. Issues that we've seen in the last, Tim having problems with shipping charges being inflated. How big a thing were you ordering? You said it was a desktop?
Yeah. Tower.
Tower, yeah. I don't normally have my towers delivered via FedEx. Most of them have always been UPS.
This was the only choice with the provider.
And how far away were they? Was this
if
California?
I remember right, South Florida.
That's interesting. Okay. I had a interesting aberration with my Blink doorbell. It decided to commit harikiri again.
Okay.
All of a sudden, one day, I click on it to go check to see, did I hear? I want to make sure that I didn't have my lawn service coming out and fertilizing the lawn because I heard noise outside and it sounded like lawnmowers and all kinds of stuff and it sounded pretty close. And I go to click on the Blink, says, show me the current video recording, live recording, and then says, oh, I'm unable to do that. Please try again in a few minutes. Well, I've seen this message before. It's not this, it doesn't go away in a few minutes. It's off somewhat permanently. It can no longer reach the camera for some reason. So I went to look at this thing and I said, well, let's first try and pop out a battery, pop it back in again. Still no answer. So went out there and popped out pulled it off again and popped out the batteries and loosened one of the connections to the doorbell circuit. Waited about 10 seconds, reconnected it, put everything back in. Oh, we're back live again. So even though it can't run off of the doorbell wiring by itself, it still needs the batteries to work. That still is enough to power enough of a keep alive to keep it from resetting when it needs to reset. I didn't try and hold the reset button in for 5 seconds. I didn't have that instruction currently handy to remember, like, how much if I hold it in too long, it's going to reset the Wi-Fi password and I'll have to take a picture of the barcode on the back and try and reset it up again. But I saw there was some aggravation that I just didn't expect to have to deal with since I put in new batteries probably about 6 months ago. But on the good note, however, I was going through cleaning out parts of my office and I found the Blink camera that I used to Blink Mini that I used to use downstairs that unfortunately got a bath from the water softener and the sump pump spraying all over the place, and it had gone out of service, and I replaced the Mini with a different one. And I just happened to plug it into another USB supply and it powered up. And I think, whoa, and needed to have the Wi-Fi reset into it. But other than that, it thought it was happy. So having it sit in a box for about 4 months was enough to make it heal itself. The USB power adapter, however, did not be so lucky. It was still charred a little bit around the edge. So I think it's toast. But that's some of my experiences with Mr. Blink lately. I don't know if there's any things that are any more reliable ones that might be out there. I don't know if the Ring suffers from the same kind of problems. I did notice some other things that have started to appear in the user interface for Blink. Namely, it is now mentioning things like person or motion detection may be coming forward on an updated firmware release for Blink, because I see some of those settings in some of the additional setting screens on the Blink cameras. They typically only handled motion before, but now they may start to recognize somebody. This is a person that was moving through the field of view, similar to what Ring does and what the um, Chamberlain does with their video capability as well. Let's see, what other things? You were mentioning some other freight charges for chocolate covered matzahs there, Sid. Or was that only packaging you were
Yeah,
referring to?
that's only packaging for me. Otherwise it would be probably less. The picture behind me is my security system.
I may have to deploy a camera in the backyard as well. We've had a couple of mallard ducks that keep showing up at random times, and I thought it was only one pair of mallard ducks that were showing up until I was looking out there this afternoon, and the one pair is underneath the bird feeder, and the male starts shooting over to the right, like, where's he going in a hurry? And he was chasing off the other pair that just showed up. They all look the same to me anyway. But open forum. So people have questions. Anybody have a question they would like to pose to the group? Oh, now we're all quiet.
Well, let me ask this. I've been using the Chromebook mostly now for the meetings, and like Sid there is showing the shark behind him. Does Chromebook have the ability to put a background behind you too? Because I was looking around, I didn't see anything. Maybe it doesn't have that capability.
Well, you would have to have a green screen at the minimum, and you would have to have some sort of graphics processing. And I suspect that the Chromebook has to pretty much cost reduced it out. So you don't have as much graphics potential as you might need.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't even see a setting anywhere. Is there
because
Yeah, they
doesn't
won't
work.
offer it if you don't have the capability.
Are
Okay.
you using the Zoom through the browser?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's in the.
You ain't gonna see a setting.
Oh,
It's a basic. This is it. Last shot. If the application doesn't work, and it's the application, if you got the right hardware, that'll let you have a background with or without a green screen behind you, which is if you got a fairly decent green bed sheet that you can hang behind you to cover up everything that's behind you in the current image, then sometimes you can get a background to appear on the green screen. Just like Sid's doing there. That's his green sheet in the back. He's got it hanging there in some fashion. Then he can take the backgrounds, activate it.
On the
Yeah, hey,
green
now that's
screen.
an improvement, big improvement. Add a background image, and it will show up because of that green background.
I
That's
thought I
even a
could
better
only.
improvement.
I thought I was only able to use Zoom through the browser because I thought there was something last year that said we're not going to support this anymore and you have to use it through the browser. Is that not correct?
There may be Chromebooks that are not supported. There
You
may
gotta
not be a Chrome OS app any longer.
right, and I don't think they'll do it on a browser. Number one, number two, for the Chromebook to support that and have enough graphics, you got to get up into the high end where they cost $600 to $800 machine. Anything
don't have enough
below that,
memory
odds
and don't
are
have
it
enough
ain't gonna work.
graphics.
Yeah, I only paid $2.99.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna be missing features, and you
Okay.
probably won't even be able to use the Zoom application.
Will my Linux machine be able to do that without a problem, or?
What kind of hardware does it have? What kind of a computer?
it's a Optiplex 3050,
Yeah.
and it's
Oh,
running
form
Linux Mint
factor.
22.
And therefore, it does have the hardware requirements to do
Okay.
various things with Zoom.
All right, I may
Right.
try that.
And
And
it may be able to handle the background, but don't necessarily bet on it because it's still old hardware for the graphics processor.
Okay. Okay.
but on Linux, you stand a chance because the operating system isn't chewing up so many resources.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any of the old avatar capabilities listed on here, even though I do have an 8-core video processor courtesy of AMD, but obviously it's not making use of it. So unless I go in and try and change some of the parameters on it to be,
Check your system for a graphics hardware acceleration.
and I think I have it turned off. So that's probably why.
That's why.
Yeah.
And that means also
Because
too that your CPU's doing double duty, trying to do your regular computer stuff and do the encoding decoding of your video in the CPU, not the GPU.
Well, I don't think it has much of a problem with that on this machine with 16 threads. So it can go hog wild on those kinds of things if it wanted. Yeah. Right now it says my CPU usage is about 2% for Zoom Workplace and 3% overall. So I don't think that's going to be the issue. Yeah. But it was just a choice because I wanted this machine to run cooler than rather than sitting there and kerning for most of the stuff, especially with Zoom and those kinds of things. My wife uses this for her Zoom sessions as well, so it's more convenient. But that would be one reason why. What did you say your hardware was, Dennis, on the Linux machine?
It's a 3050 Optiplex, small frame factor.
Oh, form.
3050. Yeah.
It may. Is it an i5 at least?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay, so you'd have to look and see when you have it what graphics drivers you have loaded with it and what options it may have. Or if you look up the original hardware specs, you may be able to look up because I think Dell's have that service tag on the back of them.
Right.
You can put that into one of the Dell customer service pages and pull up what was originally shipped with it and get an idea whether it had graphics capabilities or it just had Intel graphics. If it has Intel graphics, you're not going to get too far. If you have one of the additional graphics accelerators, then you might be able to get more out of it.
Okay.
But even there, I don't know whether you gotta have a way of turning on the accelerator if you've got a graphics processor that will handle those kind of things, because not like Windows doesn't turn it on. You got to turn it on, and I don't know if that's true in Linux or not. Never ran across the problem yet.
See if it says anything about Optiplex. It does not come typically with the NVIDIA RTX. It has integrated graphics card from Intel. So that's probably what you got.
Yeah, so odds
What
are
you
you're
see is
not going
what
to
you
get
get.
backgrounds. You might have a slim chance if you get the green background, it might work, but odds are it's not going to ever give you the backgrounds.
Okay. I know I had the specs printed out somewhere, but I'll find them later.
Yeah.
Good. While
So
you're
I've
looking for those, look for my missing tools.
been doing some more experimentation with my Tapo devices, even though I don't have the Tapo app on my Kindle Fire. It does seem to be able to respond to voice commands that ask me to turn on or off a particular Tapo switch, and also to interrogate a particular room's temperature. So if I ask the A person, what's the temperature in the family room, it will respond correctly with the correct temperature that's currently showing on the device. Yes, Sid.
All right, back to Dennis's thing. There is specifically a Zoom app for Chromebooks. If you load the Google Play Store and search for Zoom for Chromebook, you should be able to find it, assuming it will work on your hardware. But
That was
it's worth a try.
Zoom for Chromebook, and it was on the
A
what?
Google Play Store.
Google
Chromebooks
Play Store.
are
Okay.
But you have
Play
to have a
Store based.
Chromebook that supports Android
Mm.
applications, and you got to have that feature active on the Chromebook
Okay.
because they don't always activate that feature. They assume that if you want to run Android apps, you're going to know enough to turn that feature on first. Then you hopefully you got the Play Store, or you got to play games to get the Play Store put on, and then you can select Zoom for Android.
Yeah, except this is not the Android version. This is specifically the Chromebook version of Zoom.
Okay.
Oh, maybe it
Yeah,
exists.
so you may be able to get it through Chrome OS through their access to the store.
Yeah, you may not have to do the Play Store. In other words, you go to Chrome Web Store.
Yeah, the Chrome
Oh.
Web Store may have the same one or something like it. Not promising anything.
Okay, I didn't even know there was a Chrome Web Store. Okay.
Anybody
Which is
who's ever used Chrome has always had the option of Chrome Web Store going back to the first version.
okay.
And
we're
what's
on
in the web store, what's in the Chrome Web Store is a little different from what's in the Google Play Store.
right.
Okay.
We're on version 137, I think it is, for Chrome OS. So that's been around for a long, long, long time.
No, those were all daily updates.
Yeah. Just
Doesn't
about
take me.
every week.
Yeah. So I got this nice little email from Xfinity after they already upgraded me to, I think they said 600 megabits per second or something like that is what they had upgraded me to, and I typically will see on one or two of my machines pushing like 660, almost 700 or 700 and change. And then they also sent me this email said, "Would you like to go faster? Would you like to pay more for your internet?" Nope, I'm playing fine just now. But they just happened to offer it, I think. That's a little kind of icing on the cake.
They've been doing it a lot. And they're also offering their upgraded router. They keep offering as well.
Well,
I
that's the deal. They want you to use their router so they can charge you more money for the rental of something that you could buy outright.
regarding that gateway, the XB7, which is their current baseline, does not handle Wi-Fi 6, and not all of the Wi-Fi 6 anyway, and it does not handle WPA3.
Ooh, okay.
And also, I don't think you can turn off WPS in the XB7. But if you upgrade to the XB8, you get all that, and you can turn off WPS through the interface.
Oh, okay. But
W-
it's still only one device, and it
Yeah.
insists on wanting to use full AC, 802.11 AC, which wants to use either 80 or 160 megahertz of bandwidth, which is almost the entire 5 gigahertz band, or maybe it'll do it on 6 or 7 if they can support it, but that means you have to have all your devices supported as well to make use of that. I find it's just as effective for my wireless devices to just use the 40 megahertz. This is only using 40 megahertz, and it was pushing over 300 megabits per second throughput with test programs. So I thought, I don't need anything more than that. It's not like I'm going to go anywhere outside beyond this or download, because download is still only 40 megabit per second. It's not anything astounding. I mean, if I did everything via my wired network, I still wouldn't need any of those options.
Are you
I mean,
talking about are you talking about the download or the upload?
well, both. I mean, you're offering speeds, and they offer usually on some of these, they offer gigabit upload and downloads, but it depends on what everyone else in your subdivision is doing if you're ever going to get the gigabit upload. I mean, they did recently crank with the last couple upgrades. I went from 12 to 24 to 40 now for upload speeds.
Yeah.
But they haven't, and now they, like my son-in-law has got the full gig up and down that he uses, but they're not using the Xfinity gateway either. They're just using their own cable modem. I mean, it's a gigahertz capable, gigabit Ethernet capable modem, not multi-gigabit. Although some of those will start to come out soon. I mentioned with the 2.5 gig or the 5 gig copper capability.
Yeah.
I expect those to be showing up any day now, at least until the tariffs kick in.
Yeah.
I've got Xfinity coming tomorrow. In my townhouse, we have the internet service, and they provided the gateway, Xfinity's gateway, and 3 wireless boxes for the TVs. So we've had all kinds of problems with the TVs, either cutting out or pixelating. And I have problem with mine. So the basic service that they gave us was the 600 megabit or megabits.
Yeah.
And so I'd been on the phone with Comcast several different times. Last time I was on there, they said, well, with that 600 gigabits, you could only support like 6 items on your Wi-Fi. Well, I had like 13. So
That's
they talked me in. So they talked me into paying $20 a month more to go to 1 gigabit, and it still hasn't solved the problem. So I've got.
If the devices that connect are not capable of doing 802.11ac, it doesn't make sense for you to go to a gigabit because those devices aren't going to be fast enough to use it.
They're
Right.
trying to tell me that they had to have the faster speed to be able to support more items on the Wi-Fi.
That's not true.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
You can
I'm gonna.
support.
Well, I've got a tech coming out tomorrow, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
really get it resolved. But we'll be watching our TV, and all of a sudden the picture just pixelates on one TV. All the other TVs, it'll just sort of all of a sudden just freezes and it goes blank. And then it'll come back.
That
And
kind of what you're describing looks to me like the technician didn't know what they were doing and they got the wiring wrong.
yeah, well, I've got like 5 TVs in the house here, and
Yeah.
I've got a bunch of Wi-Fi devices to turn lights on and off. The
Yeah.
timers.
Yeah.
On
So
all of those devices that you have for the Wi-Fi devices, if they're only some of those are they're all 2.4 gigahertz more than likely, because it's kind of rare to have any 5. So the speed isn't going to help them at all because you can't use gigabit speeds on 2.4. It just doesn't go that fast.
Yeah.
And the other thing would be is if whether they even support 802.11n, which would let them go a little bit faster, but it's just better range. With the old Cisco 802.11a, b, and g access points, they would start to have problems when you had more than 25 devices all using WPA2 Enterprise.
Yeah.
That was the point at which they started to have problems. That was 20 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
They have made a lot of improvements. I would expect you could probably handle about 200 devices just with standard 100 megabit Ethernet.
And
Okay.
Wayne, do you have all your 5 TVs on at the same time? Just asking.
No,
Okay.
I've got a couple of them on right now. My wife's watching in one room, and I've got another one here.
So
But
generally, you only have 1 or 2 on at
yeah,
once. Yeah.
just it's one TV watching, and the one
Mm.
TV we've got that's hooked up to the actual box, not through Wi-Fi, but it's hooked up hardwired to the gateway, and that thing just pixelates, but it's not all the time. It just all of a sudden it'll start
Does,
pixelating,
does it
and
pixelate on certain channels and not all?
all of them. Doesn't
Okay,
make
more
any
than
difference.
likely, yeah, more than likely, if it pixelates on all channels, something is wrong with the cable that goes between that remote box and the main X1 box.
You,
Okay.
So
Wayne,
there,
also,
you have probably a whole collection of cables and everything, and I don't know if you have splitters or did they put in
Oh
a
yeah, I
Unity.
got splitters. Yeah.
I have this thing they used to supply, and I purchased one of my own. It is called the Unity Gain Amp. They used to call it an X1 amplifier. So what it would do is it would take in the input signal and it would replicate it to all the ports at the same strength it came in at. So it wouldn't
Oh yeah.
add any additional gain. But when you would split it this way, it overcame the amount of loss due to the splitting. Because every time you split, it 3 dB, 3 dB, 3 dB. That's a factor of 2 each time you split. So if you put splitter, 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 you could be down to 1/8 of the original signal. And if you didn't have enough signal to begin with, now you definitely don't have enough when you get down to the last splitter. So the Unity Gain Amp is the thing that really helps me. When I start to see pixelation, particularly on one channel or another, and they may move the channel, it's because interference is getting into the system from outside the system, and it's competing with the signal that's at a lower level than normal. So what you will see on those kind of things, pixelation, like channel 7 may start to pixelate, or your channel 7 high def. If you set your X1 to not always switch to the highest quality, sometimes you can switch between the low def and the high def on the channel. And if you have pixelation on both of those at the same time, the problem is at Xfinity's end when they decoded channel 7 from wherever they got it, and that's at the head end. But if it's only on the high def or only on the low def, then you know it could be interference at your end. If it's interference at your end, you probably got a connector that's not tightened enough.
Yeah.
And I've gone around with a pair of channel locks, the little 6-inch channel locks, and used to tighten those connectors. And all of a sudden I tightened it and my pixelation went away completely on that channel. It's like, okay. Because when they move the channels around, and the channels don't always stay the same, they move the channels around so that the people that are using the channels most commonly used have less outside sources of interference. But if they happen to choose 107, 108 megahertz, or 123 megahertz as their center frequency for one of these channels, which happens, then all of a sudden aircraft radio, when the planes go overhead, can come right into your system and interfere.
Wow.
My brother happened to have one amplifier, and then he put another amplifier to amplify it to go to the other TVs because he used the amplifiers like splitters. Except that his cable that he used on the second splitter, after it had been boosted 8 times, didn't have 100% coverage on the shield for the coax. Almost all of the coax I use in this house is like quad shielded. Okay, at least 3 shields and preferably 4. That means they're twisted and they're shielded and twisted and shielded. So it's no longer got the original braid copper. It's got a full shield that happens to go into the connector. If you don't have that and you're using the copper braid, you can start to radiate. So my brother was transmitting HBO on top of some of the aircraft frequencies. So the FCC was given a complaint, and they had to go around and they found my brother broadcasting, and they red tagged him. They said, turn off your cable system because you are interfering. Your HBO is coming over the 123.3 inbound to O'Hare.
What?
So yeah, that's what happens when it radiates outside the system. But when it comes in, it's just as bad because you see pixelation. So on the ones that I would say the pixelation is bad, even after you've tightened up the connectors, either it's been split one too many times and it's still low, and moving it to a better tap, like with more signal, like one of the ones higher up in the tree, well, they'll show whether or not it's a signal related thing or not.
Yeah, well,
There is
that's at the end of the house, at the end of where all the cable runs down, and I've got a splitter, so I split between that and the gateway. So the
yes.
gateway and the TV box is on splitter there.
Well, if the guy comes out and he determines this, he may supply you a Unity cable splitter or Unity gain amp. They used to come in 5-port and 8 ports.
Okay.
And like I said, I'm using an 8-port right now, and I don't think they supply them anymore. But this was one that I purchased myself. I found the name of this thing, found it, and ordered it online. It came from a company in Canada. Thank you. But since I've had that, and it has the provision, it's powered, so it has to have a little power adapter to do this. But it had a provision for the Ethernet to come off of a 6 dB cut without any power. So if the cable comes in and the power's out, you still could have power running in if your cable modem was powered off a UPS. But I answered the whole thing by just that whole thing is powered off of the UPS along with the cable modem and the main router.
Wayne,
Well, I'm not
So
sure how this house is all wired because it comes in on one end of the house and it comes through the bedroom and it goes up a wall and it comes up into my office and it looks like there's splitters at every one of these places. So I
yeah,
think that's what the problem is.
Wayne,
I know what Mike's situation is because my cable box is southeast of me here, about 75 feet. But the cable run is about 100 feet to come all the way back here behind me, on the wall behind me. And then it comes in and does another 45 feet to the corner where it comes in, and that's where my main distribution is for the rest of the house. So I
Okay.
got a good 110 feet of cable in line that has a tendency to have loss. So when they run, and I had them run a new line out to the box, and they said that's the same signal level. You have too much cable here. The only way to reduce that would be to change from RG11 to RG6. But if you want to use RG6 cable, it is a lot more labor intensive to make the connectors. You just don't crimp it and put the connector on, you're done. No, you got to solder a pin onto there to reduce the size of the center conductor so it won't jam in and damage the socket you're plugging it into. Yes. So you can tell I did RF at one point in time.
Wayne,
I even used to go around with it was a cable TV meter, a field strength meter. Not just field strength meter, but it would measure the actual signal from cable TV signals when they were analog. And you could decode it. You go tune manually to the channel, and you could push the audio decode, and you could hear HBO or whatever it was, or whatever voice you could hear with it. And then you knew which channel you were on. And then you could also hear some of the other interfering sources that may have been broadcasting in. If it was something like two-way radio coming in, somebody kicks in, it's on VHF FM or something comes in, it might blast on top of your signal. There's a lot of interference sources. And even because cable channels now overlap the broadcast spectrum, you could even have UHF TV channels coming in, interfering with your cable channels.
Okay.
All it needs is a loose wire on that. If the ground opens up on that cable, it becomes a giant antenna.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, but the connect and finger tight is usually not enough. It needs to
No,
be another
yeah.
eighth of a turn beyond that.
Uh, Wayne, since you
Yes.
got a tech coming out, also advise them that while you've been on this Zoom meeting tonight, your audio has been dropping out periodically or almost dropping out, making it very hard to understand sometimes what you're saying.
Yeah, because I had a thing pop up on my screen. It says it's unstable signal.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've got both downstream and upstream issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
By the
yeah.
way, while everybody was discussing all of this, I ran a speed test, even with Zoom running. I'm 1.2 gigabits per second down, 127 megabits per second up. Ping
They did,
19, down 29, up 26.
and you didn't have the statistics running at the same time to see if it was doing other interference or whatever on the Zoom session. Jitter
I don't
seems
know.
about 2 to 5 milliseconds. Video jitter is lower.
All I'm saying is that I get pretty good speeds.
Yeah.
And when I did do the upgrade to Wi-Fi 6, I had to upgrade the Wi-Fi card in my tower because it was
Uh,
Wi-Fi 5.
yeah, this one does Wi-Fi 6 at this end, but the router doesn't support Wi-Fi 6. But that would just give me additional channels I could configure the router for at this point in time, the way I use my 5 gigahertz band, because I have several other sources on the 5 gigahertz band, and I choose my bands so that they try to don't overlap anybody outside my house, because I'll do a scan to see, okay, who's using what channels. And I can tell my neighbor next door has got his Xfinity box trying to run 802.11ac, running the full 160 megahertz wide. So I know, and he won't ever carry this far because when the wider the bandwidth and the faster you're trying to go, the less distance you're going to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a marginal connection and you don't need the full bandwidth of 1.2 gigahertz that they claim you're going to get, cut it down. Cut it down to in either a 40 megahertz wide channel or even a 20 megahertz wide channel. A 20 megahertz wide channel can still do over 100 megabits per second. 100 megabits per second is more than enough to run one Zoom session. It may not be enough to do a backup to the cloud, but that's the only place where I think you're going to need more. So, did anybody else have a question or want to discuss this further? Okay. I mean, I started looking into some suggestions for tonight's meeting, and I did ask ChatGPT for some information, but unfortunately, the thing I don't like about ChatGPT so much is one particular thing here. If I tried to print out the result from ChatGPT as a PDF, well, for some reason, Chrome didn't understand it's a multiple page thing and wouldn't print the whole thing out. Only the last page would want to print out. So you have to copy and paste into a Word document and then print that out if you want to see it. But I was looking at options for purchasable NAS devices, and I asked what inexpensive NAS are recommended. And this was its current choice. Some of these are relatively small network attached storage that are very inexpensive, but because of some of the options chosen to get the cost down, they may not be able to do much more than file sharing capabilities. So there's an entry level Synology that can cost around $100. That's probably without the disk. So you have to add a disk to plug into this thing. You could use an SSD for some of these things. It will be lower power, but you may want to consider whether or not you really want to have a hard drive there so that you can have a little bit longevity to the machine as well when you use it for backups. There's a 2-bay one here that comes in for about 190. And if you're buying the discs, and if you're going to get something like a 2 or 4 terabyte hard drive, Western Digital Red, you're going to set you back a little over $100 to $200, depending on the size of the drive. So this Synology with the 2 drives would be in about the $500 range by the time you put in some of these things. This is a brother QNAP to one of the ones that I have. Mine does not have an ARM CPU, but I have 8 gigabytes of RAM on mine because it's an older unit, and it also has 2 bays. So yeah, your choice if you want to have something with an ARM on it. You're using their software solutions, but in terms of additional apps that you may be able to get to run with it, you may be a little bit more limited. And then there's another one here, AccuStore Drive Store 2, that is, it handles light Plex. Okay. I mean, I have probably a pretty healthy Plex. I can do 4K video if I wish, and it will transcode with the setup I have. So, and then there's also, you can do the Raspberry 4, but I will get into that in my presentation a little bit more. And again, when you're looking for these things, whether they're diskless or a disk is included, occasionally they'll have a disk included, but it'll probably be a smaller drive. It may only be a 2 terabyte. And then how much RAM you want to have, whether or not you want to have at least 8 gigabytes of RAM is probably a healthy one if you want to do anything more than file storage. If you want to have container support and LXD and those kind of things, then you may want to consider that. But I will stop that share and then I'll go into, let's see, I think this is the one I want to do. Make sure that that's running. Yeah, that's good. No, that's the PowerPoint. I want to run this one. That's the one I want. All right, now get to my share. All right, share. Okay. All right, so we have this. Let's wish the thing would move out of the way. Good. Yeah. Anyhow, I think I'm still sharing that, isn't it? Is it still sharing? No, it is not. Hold on. Let me bring it back up again. All right, good. Okay, so considering network attached storage, buy or build options. So what is NAS? It's nothing more than the simplest form is a shared volume on a network computer that you can access from other devices on the network. I wouldn't call it a NAS in all cases, just because I have a laptop running in the other room that I can access its volumes from this computer via the network connection. That's not quite what I would use NAS. I call it. It could fit the definition of NAS, but it's just happens to be a shared volume. NASs are typically used for a remote storage capability. It's like a local cloud, perhaps. You would want to store items on it that you would like to back up or recover from. You would put media on these things so your media playback devices could access it without having to have your computer powered on. Classically, it also refers to type of network entity which supports them more than just network storage. So you can have media hosting, container support, IoT support, security camera storage is another thing that they can use for it as well. Sometimes those apps cost extra on top of your existing license. But why a NAS? Well, backup is one possible reason to have a NAS. So you can use, for backup, you can plug in a local USB cable, and you plug in a drive and do your backup to that, and then you put it back in the disk drawer, and you use a different one each time. And that can get old after you have more than a half a dozen of these things in that drawer. Which one did I use for the last backup? I want to do father, grandfather, son. How do I do? And then trying to explain that to somebody who's not computer literate is virtually impossible, but it can be done. You can back up to the cloud, but you have to deal with the additional time depending on if you have something less than full speed going up through the internet to your server location. That uplink speed is probably the most throttling, but it could be somewhere between you and your server that you're storing it on, because not everyone on the internet may give you a super fast connection. If you're sharing a server or something with somebody else, it could be you don't get full bandwidth. And if you ever need to download that information that you put in the cloud, well, you have to have a network connection at the location you want to do the restore, so you can do the restore via the network. You can back up over the network to another machine if there's sufficient room on that machine. But then you have to have that machine on to support the transfer when you want to do it, or you got to run back and forth between machines, turn that one on, turn the other one on. Now I can do my backup. That can be done, but having the machine, more than one machine on at the same time for longer periods of time is not exactly energy efficient. A lot of these dedicated NAS can be energy efficient, and they can even go to sleep and then support wake on LAN, which allows you to bring them back up without you having to run in the other room, or you have an app on your phone and click and it turns on the server, and now it'll stay on until it decides to go off every night at 2 a.m. or something when you know you're not using it. So it can automatically go to sleep and save power. Not that some of these NAS devices use a lot of power. I think the one that I have uses about 20 watts when it's running, and when it's not running, it uses less than 1. But it's just the idea of I don't need something continuously drawing power and not being useful with it. Build or buy. So if you want to purchase, there are a bunch of them out there, depending on what you want to do with it and how much storage it's going to require and what kind of resources it needs for what you want to do with it. And the smaller ones will be between $200 and $1,000, depending on the drives you use and the target platform. You can either get it with 1, 2, 4, or more drives, a capability for bays that you can put drives into. And you can set them up to do RAID, or you can do just a bunch of disks, or any of the options of, that you want to try and choose. You can add expansion docks to some of these things that either come via a USB connection, or there's even types of expansion docks that will work via internet connection, so that you can have multiple NASs looking like one, so that you talk to the one NAS and it puts your data on a different one. And the larger ones usually have more slots available. You can get them with 8 or 10 disk support. So you could be talking 64 to 128 terabytes. The downside of the larger and faster ones might require you to upgrade your backbone to have faster than 1 gigabit in your house. I don't know if you can get 5 gig or 10 gig copper yet, or if you have to use fiber optic connections to do that. Typically, it used to be fiber optics if you wanted to do much faster than 2.5 or 5. Depending on your needs, 1 gigabit's probably going to be more than enough for a typical size home. Even a provincial power user would be 1 gig is more than enough. And you don't need to provision SSDs in here as opposed to hard drives, because at 125 megabits per second, you've saturated the gigabit link. If you want to go faster than 125 megabytes per second, yeah, then you can go ahead and get the 2.5 gig, or you can try and do it over the air with 802.11ac. But are you going to save that much time? Probably not as much. You probably hit your limit on sending stuff back and forth through your internet provider and hit your what is it, a terabyte limit? 100 terabytes, I think, and then Comcast wants to shut you down if you don't have an unlimited plan. Yeah, I think it's 100 or 120 terabytes. Yeah. Okay, so that's that. Let's go down. Purchase options also. You can find some other ones here. Network attacks from Synology, QNAP, Synology, other ones, TerraMaster, and it's a collection of ones that I had found that were out there, and they're priced appropriately. They had been more pricey years ago, but the prices have dropped. So until the tariffs kick in, you might still have some bargains. Here's the other options that we have. 6 bays. Here's one with M.2 SSD slots. There's $450. Again, that's without any drives. So if you've got a lot of slots, you have to plug drives into them, and you want to make sure that the drives that you purchase will work with the NAS, because not every drive will work with every NAS. That is something that you have to look for compatibility, and you check. QNAP has an online thing that you can click, 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 and all of a sudden says, yep, it's compatible. That family is compatible. Oh, no, that one's not compatible. So you don't want to pick one that doesn't work so well for you. Less expensive. You want to go less expensive? This is one way to do it. You can repurpose an old machine and share the disk, and you might be better off with a desktop rather than a laptop, because laptops don't usually like to run all the time. They usually have issues with heat and or batteries cook. Some of the older laptops that were consumer grade laptops don't know when to stop charging the battery, and they'll overcharge the battery and damage it. Nice to have a battery in there in case you need it to keep it powered up for that short period of time if the power glitches. But is it worth it compared to, I want to use an older machine and put in a couple of large 4 terabyte drives and use that for storage? I could do that. And you don't have to use Windows for the operating system. You can find ones that you can download and put your own open media server on there and use those kinds of things as well. So it's a Debian Linux variant that you can install. There's other NAS software that you can install on x86 hardware. The downside of using the older PCs, it is an older PC. Okay, so there you may use more power than a purchased NAS. They're not particularly energy efficient. You may have enough memory on it, because you don't need a lot of memory on these things when you're running a Linux variant. But if you're going to run anything serious like trying to do any container stuff or any emulation, you may want to consider making sure it's a strong enough processor. With an old PC, you will need to have a keyboard and monitor in case you need to reboot this thing or do any maintenance on it. As opposed to a lot of the NAS devices that you purchase, you do everything via web interface. How about using Raspberry Pi? Yeah, it could be used as a NAS, and people have done this, and there's a couple examples on how to do this. Okay, one that you can go in and it'll show you how to do this and choose the right pieces. You're going to have to get probably one of the bigger Raspberry Pi devices. The old Raspberry Pi 2 might not have enough Moxie to do it. Also, you want to get one that at least has an Ethernet port on it. But the Ethernet port on Raspberry Pi on the older units was a subject of contention because it came in through, I think, a USB interface, so it was limited in speed. So you might not be able to get the same speed that you would want to have. The thing you would run on it is this thing, Open Media Vault. It is the Debian thing that will run on top of Raspberry Pi, but you might need a Raspberry Pi 5. But before you go off and do that, you might want to read this guy's article about why he regrets using Raspberry Pi for his NAS. He complained of the fact that he couldn't choose his favorite NAS distribution to run on it because it was ARM-based and they didn't have an ARM port for it. And if you try and use more than 2 USB hard drives via the USB port, there was power issues, not being able to supply enough power to power the drives. And the hat interfaces were almost a requirement to keep the thing cool, and those add to the cost of a Raspberry Pi. So it's a nice idea, but needs a little bit more power than your typical Raspberry Pi has available and or integration. Another possibility would be using a mini PC-based NAS. Many of these PCs, the lower end mini ones, which are maybe N100, N150, they're quad core. They have maybe 8 gig of memory, maybe 16. And there's people that have done that and built their own NASs with that. Because it's an x86, you have options to use the other choices for NAS software that are out there. Power is better than a desktop because this mini PC that I'm using right now is probably not even using more than 25 or 30 watts. So that's an option to use as well. But if you're going to use an external disk chassis where you're plugging in other disks and such, some of those chassis have a 250 watt power supply, so you're going to have to deal with that and what to do if you're going to have a power failure or such. You may want to look at some of the mini PCs that have more powerful graphics processors if you intend on using them for real-time transcoding of video. But specifically, if you want to run Plex on this thing as well. If you do the Plex server that will do the transcoding, you have to see whether it will support that hardware. And then make sure your choice of the NAS distro supports that graphics processor as well, and you can turn it on and off and whatever. NAS versus PC. Once you got the NAS software installed, you probably will never need to have a keyboard and monitor connected unless you got some sort of added apps like Chrome or Firefox via terminal. I think that's one of the options I have on my QNAP is I have an option that I could use a Chrome browser through the NAS if I wanted to by logging into the account and said, okay, I want to run Chrome from the NAS. Maybe nothing else is working in the house and that's the last thing working. The NAS device that I have, when it goes into suspend mode, uses under a watt. So that is much better to use when you're on a UPS. And most of these NAS that have been configured with Debian or their own private OS do support the use of the USB shutdown capability or suspend capability via USB cable from the UPS to your NAS. And then you go into the configuration on the NAS and said, yeah, I have a USB port here, and you will get shutdown requests from the UPS when it's on battery power and you need to shut down. The other thing about using NAS OS updates are much less frequent than Windows updates. And they almost always ask for permission before they go to want to install things. And that's pretty much what I had put together. Let's do a stop share and I can ask questions. Anybody have any questions about that?
Well, I've got a QNAP, a 4-bay that I bought about 6 years ago, and I haven't really used it in the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, I have one too, but mine's not a 4-bay. Mine's a TS251A, which is not quite that dated. It's got a quad core on it. And let's see, that's what I want right there, that one. We'll send that and we'll do that. and I say open and I say send. So now those two presentations that I had are available in chat. There's some things on there that I've looked at and I've thought about using. I do use it for my Plex media server. And the only downside I have on the Plex media server is the fact that my other Plex devices update the client way more frequently than I update my server. So when that happens, my server needs to be manually updated and it's not available on the QNAP store the same way everything else is. So I have to manually go to Plex, and I got the lifetime server subscription for Plex. I'll download the latest Plex that'll run on my QNAP, download it and put it on and install it and have it replace the existing app. And then I'm back working again for another 6 months till somebody upgrades too far again. But I use it so I have the Plex media support. There's other utilities in there. I use it for backup. So when I'm backing up and I'm on a gigabit Ethernet connection and I'm backing up both an SSD and a hard drive, doing a backup, and I was monitoring the backup process with the resource monitor, it told me I was using between 68 and about 80 megabytes per second throughput going to the hard drives via the gigabit Ethernet connection. So what that told me is that's a bit faster than I would ever be able to do with a USB 2 plug-in drive. If I had a USB 3, yes, you might be able to go faster. But a USB 2 drive is going to peter out about 45 or 50 megabytes per second. So I was able to back up at that speed. So I backed up the 233.4 gigabytes of compressed data in about an hour and 2 minutes. So averaging about 4 gigabytes a minute, that's respectable speed. So it means the whole backup, took 45 minutes to an hour, done, and that was a full backup, not an incremental, not anything in between. You can do incrementals, and that will speed up things and be more likely to handle those kinds of things. But yeah, it's your choice, however you want to back it up. I know Windows is getting more obstinate about, you want to back up your data? Oh, I'll help you back up your data. Let me put it on OneDrive for you. No! Because Windows 11 is kind of obnoxious about, even Windows 10 has been obnoxious. Oh, you haven't backed up your data. Yes, I did. I just did it. It doesn't know that I happen to do it with the other utility, but it's backed up. But Wayne, do you use your QNAP for backup or anything else?
Well, I tried to set it up, but that was about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's just been sitting on my desk now for the last 5 years. So it's a 451, a TS 451.
Okay, that's a fair one. It's got a quad core and it's an Intel processor. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got two 3 terabyte hard drives in it and one 500 and one 700 gigabyte drives.
So you just have them as just a bunch of disks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I bought the terabyte ones. Those are those red, the red ones, whatever it is that are
the old Western Digital. I got Western Digital Reds too.
Yeah.
My Reds are both 4 terabyte. So yeah, I've never had a problem with it. It occasionally is obnoxious where it wants to do an update, and it lets me know it's time to do an update. And when it's got to do a full startup and shutdown, it's just like an old PC. It just takes a long time for it to come up and get everything running, and then to shut it down, it's got to try and methodically turn off all of the processes, just like a typical Unix system you had to do. You had to shut down all the processes, quiesce everything, and now it can shut down. Set the file system to good and click off. But so most of the time, my machine just goes to suspend. So I'll use it and let it go ahead and suspend. And let's see, what did it say? when I went in to look at it today, it said last time it had been booted was 145 days ago. So it's been a while since it's been rebooted. So I decided before I put in an update, I said, oh, let's do a reboot, make sure everything is happy. But
I'm sure there'll be a lot of updates.
well, it can jump the updates. It doesn't have to put them in order. That's the nice thing about some of those things with the QNAP. You might have to do a staged update if it's being off for more than a year, but mine happened to find the right loads and said, okay, update, and a bunch of apps needed updated them as well. And some of it, they finally cleaned up some of the user interfaces as well. I have more of a problem, the fact that Google no longer lets you save passwords for certain things, as like when I would say, I'm sorry, but you have to, this is a local device, I'm not going to save your information. They finally were able to set it in so that it would remember at least some of my login information. And then I could manually type in the password. But because it has an old certificate, it didn't update the certificate, and it's a local IP address. It said, I can't trace this IP address back to the certificate ownership correctly, so I'm not going to let you log into this directly. It's a local IP. But when I've used it and I've needed it, and it's worked. And the other thing that it offers me is if I want to do something with it as well, I have an app on my phone up at the top in the center called Q Manager, and I can actually start it from here. I can open it up, and it'll actually open up the admin interface on my phone as well. I don't know if they had that when you were setting up your original QNAP.
This came with a remote.
That's for the media support. So if you're using this thing to play your videos through the HDMI connection on the back, then you use that.
Okay.
I have one of those.
I never got into using that. So,
in my case, my preferred devices for playing that stuff is a Roku box, one or two. So the Roku has the Plex client, and I access the server. They handshake and they said, oh, where everything's good. Here's your library. Here's everything you downloaded. Okay, thank you. Of course, there's less of an incentive to do that since a lot of these things are available on a lot of streaming services now. But sometimes some of the legacy stuff that I've collected over the years, and I've saved the images, so I thought, well, might as well keep them around. But any other questions? You ready to put one in yet, Dennis? Not yet. I mean, it is convenient, because I just had my tax stuff done, and I scanned it in. I said, I better do a backup since I got everything captured. So let's click and make sure we got a backup under our belt. So the backup is saved, and I was a copy, and then I also have my paper copies of the other things as well. So, any other questions? Okay, we're doing fine, I guess. Any ideas?
What kind of belt do you need to keep it under your belt?
A large SCSI belt, yes. Well, it was your choice. I could show you a picture of two bees. One has a regular bee and is a Canadian bee, and the other one has the regular plug on his head, and it's called a USB.
So you're saying the question, two bees or not two bees? That's the question.
That's the question.
This meeting's going downhill fast.
Well, it's sort of appropriate.
It is appropriate, yes.
I just renewed my subscription for next season for Chicago Shakespeare. So they're going to be
So you
showing a show called Hamnet.
Hamnet,
Hamnet
right?
instead of Hamlet.
Okay, and they all
True,
have
that's true.
digit call signs too.
Yeah. No, it's about Shakespeare and his daughter and his imaginary daughter. In other words, the story is basically made up because they don't know about his personal life. But in theory, he was young at some point. In theory, he could have had a kid, and that kid could have been a daughter.
hmm Okay, about as realistic as Sherlock and his daughter on CW, right?
Or or Sherlock with the Asian Watson that
Yeah,
was
that
on CBS.
Elementary. I recall that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So anybody who wanted a copy of the presentation, I put that in chat so you can download it anytime you want. And let's see what
Oh
else I
wow,
got
the
here.
meeting is going.
Yeah, of course, the meeting is going.
Well,
Yes.
you said whatever you want. You can't come back next Tuesday.
I'm not sure. I think doesn't are those things saved automatically on your Zoom when you log in and check the chat for the meeting? I'm not sure because I when you're hosting a meeting, it's different than if it's you're going because I've seen other things when I've gone in and opened a chat and I've saved the chat. So I'm not sure. I'd have to go play
Host
with
doesn't
it
have
again.
to.
If you save the chat, you are not going to be saving any documents in it.
Right.
Got to manually save
You'll
the document.
you'll see no documents, but the host doesn't have to do any kind of a save. It's automatic. But all
Okay.
attendees, if you want chat notes, you have to do a save for that. But
Yep.
I don't think there's anything in the chat other than his presentations, in which case you've got to actually go into chat to download them.
Yep.
Right. But in the presentation, I had some links in there in case you wanted to, in the presentation itself, if you wanted to look at these things further. And I've found several places where they have pretty much a tutorial on how to set up the thing you may want to try. So if you want to set up your own NAS on an old PC, there's a link for that. There was another one that talked about how to do it on a Raspberry Pi. And then there was another guy talking about what he didn't like about the Raspberry Pi images and the problems he ran into. And a lot of it depends on whether or not you want to use Open Media Vault or not. Open Media Vault will run on most of the platforms you can choose. It's a Debian release, so it's pretty much generic Linux.
Uh,
And they do have a ARM version as well as an x86. So depending on which one you would like to use. And from what I saw on the screens on the Open Media Vault, it was not that unsimilar than the user interface on my QNAP. So it may look like the same kind of screens, the same orientations, like, oh, I know where you guys got the idea from. So they mimicked it, and you go in with a web interface and you can control, there's your file manager app. There's an application to control your storage. There's the one, a resource monitor that you can control. There's other things that you can, and then you could, some of the other app, if you want to do some of the other app manipulations, like you're playing with the media server, or you need to put in your Plex server license number so that you can authorize Plex server to continue. If you wanted to use your NAS for video storage for certain types of video cameras, that usually costs extra on whoever's NAS you're going to use. I'm not sure about the open source, if they will support video camera support or not. Sometimes it requires you to license codecs and things in that order. I know that it's a token charge with the QNAP if you wanted to add the video support, but then That's another thing that controls which hard drives you can use or want to use. If you're going to do the live streaming, then you need to get selected drives that will support the real-time camera capture, and as opposed to drives that might be better for just storage of files. You may need to have the ones that are longitudinally recorded instead of perpendicularly recorded. If you remember that argument from a way time ago. Yes. The perpendicularly recorded drives took longer to get to the point where you wanted to, so their access times are much slower than the other kind of recording, which was the classical Western Digital Red service. Now, whenever you're buying a very large drive, almost all of those are perpendicularly recorded anyway. So if you're buying an 18 terabyte storage device, count on it being one of the kind that have the perpendicularly recorded, and it might take longer access time to get to your data, but they hold that much more data. So they're more inclined to record serial information over a period of time. Your mileage may vary. Yes, Sid.
I wanted to toss out, since you're talking about saving chat, don't forget you can also save transcript. If you pull up the transcript and hit save transcript at the bottom.
Yes, but that still won't have the links.
No, but it has all the discussion and stuff.
Yes, it does. It has the discussion. Yes. But that's something else that I've noticed about Zoom. When can you choose to turn on transcript? You have to turn on transcript before recording starts. Otherwise, it's no longer offered.
And you also had to, originally you had to set it in their web interface settings, not in the app. And there is a setting, by the way, you can actually disallow save transcript, which I've
Yeah, I
been in
saw.
ones where they've done that.
Oh, that's not nice. Yes. No, I've tried to use, like I said, oh, this be a nice place to use transcript on our church recording, and I go to look for, like, why is there no transcript on this thing? And that's why. So, I mean, the next best thing would be to turn on captioning, and then with the recording, and then the captioning is recorded along with the video as a separate file, and you could open up the caption file yourself and then do things with that.
There was actually a setting where you could disable saving chat also.
And I don't understand why that would be a good thing. Yeah.
Some people are controlling.
Yeah, I guess so. I wonder if that would keep you from copying and pasting out of the Zoom window as well.
Would directly. You can't control C, control V kind of thing. It won't work. However, you could still use the screen cap program and capture it. They can't stop you from doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
I mean, if your eyes can see it, there's still, you can even take a camera and take a picture of it.
Then you got to worry about the interlace on your monitor, and hopefully it's repeating faster than the camera shutter is going to take a picture of.
But I'm saying if you have no other option, you can still use that to capture.
That was something else I wanted to mention. There was an article that I came across about this gentleman wanted to modify a particular. I'm not sure, it was a camera app or something. I can't recall the name because it was not familiar to me. But his problem was he did not want to have a remote server involved and wanted to control this device locally. So he ended up hacking his hacking the interface to figure out what it was doing so he could write his own Python scripts on his own server and affect local server control of this particular home automation device. So let me see if I can find that real quick. Oh my heck. Let's see. No, don't need that. Don't need that. Not going to find it as easily. Let's see. XDA related. Okay, let's see if it has the one I want. Oh, it was a smart bulb that he was accessing, and he didn't. What the issue was that he ran into, let me see, get down to the thing. Yes, Groovy. Are you familiar with Groovy smart devices at all?
Yeah.
Okay. I had not heard of Groovy devices before. Okay, but let's see if I can do this. Let's exit that and exit that and open this. Yes. Okay, let me share this one here. Okay, so this is an article about how he wanted to integrate some older hardware into Home Assistant, and he had some Tuya devices with local Tuya and feeding that stuff into Home Assistant. But when he tried to control some of these Grovey strip lights, he had to reverse engineer so he could integrate it into Home Assistant like he had everything else. So it has a web-based API and a local API, but the web API was lacking significantly. Okay, so and if he tries to use the up and down dim button, it rate limits, and that's his claim here. It rate limits very quickly. So if you do too many requests, it was going to lock you out of the API until a timer went off for a minute, and then you could go and do some other things with it. So he couldn't get the local API to work for his Grovey lights. So he started doing some reverse engineering, and this was kind of interesting. The way he reverse engineered it was to capture packets from his phone using Bluetooth to control the device that controlled the light source and capturing packets. And I didn't know this at the time, but when I started looking at this with he had a Pixel 8 Pro, but on my Motorola Stylus 23, I noticed I had some of the same capabilities on it. I'm not sure if you have to put it into developer mode or not. So he has a Python script that would analyze some of the stuff as well. But he captured with a Bluetooth HCI logger, okay, that's built into Android. And I never knew that you had the capability of capturing Bluetooth packets on an Android phone built in to the developer interface. But I was able to locate that host controller interface section, and the log captures it decrypted so that you can see these are the packets. It's on the device that's doing the controlling, so it can capture it. And he was able to do this to reverse engineer how some of this stuff is done. Then he used the Python script to decode it and to figure out what he was doing. And now he could interface. He had done some stuff with Wireshark, but I don't know if you had a Wireshark Bluetooth capture device. I mean, I've used Wireshark and certain captures, but it's best if with Wireshark, if you're trying to capture stuff with an Ethernet connection or wireless, that you'd use it over a decrypted network. You can capture encrypted if it's encrypted with a simple key that's WPA home or WPA2 home. You could decrypt it with Wireshark as well, but it becomes a little bit squirrely doing that. But he was analyzing some of the packets going back and forth so that he could use it with the Bluetooth. So he had the Gazinta and the Gazauta. Now the thing in between is the device he's controlling. So he was able to capture the CFA file and actually use it to analyze the L2 cap messages. And that's layer 2 control access protocol messages. So he was able to analyze this and figured out what device he's controlling with it and watch the packets that are going back and forth. And if you have enough packets and enough information, you can figure out what the algorithm is that you're utilizing. So there's most of these things that are being controlled. I've noticed the same kind of things with my Wemo devices. I've seen some of the packets or some of the interfaces that you can use to affect changes on the Wemo device to turn it on or turn it off. And if I know the IP address of the particular Wemo device, I have some scripts that I can run. I can say, turn it on, turn it off, interrogate, what is it? Is it on or off? Tell me. And do those kinds of things. And it was an interesting exercise. I thought about that would be an interesting thing to try and do, but I don't have too many Bluetooth devices that I need to control, unfortunately. But he was able to go through and pull out the packets, and the the UUID of the device is the strip that he's controlling, and then there's the commands that are being executed. So he was pulling it out, and he was able to analyze it, figure out what devices, what's on or off, and if there's any authentication while it was being paired. He figured all that out and was able to do what he wanted to do. It's a pretty involved story, though. That's a Wireshark trace right there that you're showing you. Yes, that is Wireshark. It's probably a newer version of Wireshark than I was using, but anyhow, it was an interesting way of hacking an existing interface that he didn't have access to fix. So he's able to figure out his own way around it and fix it. So may have more of that kind of stuff. I've toyed with the ID also of, I saw a way you could access certain things in older Blink cameras and Blink. There's a thing called a Blink hub. The camera is harder to compromise, but the hub, the Blink hub used for cameras, actually appears to be a type of Linux device. It's very limited, probably a very, very limited Linux implementation, but it has a serial port, a TTL level serial port that you can access as a console in it. And to be able to do that, then you need a USB to serial TTL level interface. So I had purchased some time ago, months and months ago, a couple of these adapters that you would plug into a PC and a USB connection, and then you could use some serial communication program to be able to communicate on that. And then effectively you're typing on the keyboard and you're sending the commands into the device. You're trying to log into that Linux system, and there's a way to get around it. You can basically, here's what the password will be when you first log in, and basically you break into it. Then you can change things inside of there as well, I would assume. So, but I have a previously owned Blink system that had been abandoned, and I would love to make use of some of the stuff that was with it. Unfortunately, the previous owner did not deregister it first. So if I could figure a way to log into it and deregister it, then I could put it on my own system and place it. That's one way Amazon keeps you from reusing some previously owned devices. Is once it's registered in one Blink system, it cannot be re-registered in another Blink system. Yes.
Well, of course, that's not the reason. The reason is theft. If people steal them, they can't use them, and that's the reason you lock them down, so that somebody
Yeah.
who would steal one couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah. Or you could just as easily said, okay, if somebody tries to provision this and they don't have if they don't have but they won't even say, here, I got a bill of sale for this. This is the bill of sale for it. They still refuse to re-register it. Oh no, they have to go in and unregister it. It's the only way that we don't have any control of that. They do, but they say they don't have any control of it. So legally, you have a way to get around it, but practically, Amazon doesn't want to allow you to do that with a bill of sale. Yes. So, and then the other thing I thought about in the NAS application, I was looking at some of these other less expensive mini PCs. Said, oh, that's not much smaller than my existing NAS drive. I wonder if that's practically useful as a mini NAS, and maybe, it might be a possibility. So I may try and do that in the future because if my QNAP goes out of support for some reason and I want to replace it with something, I may try Open Media Vault and install that on a mini PC and hook it up to the same drives that I'm using now. And all I have to do is have a way to interface the devices to a USB connection and from a SATA, and I can buy those adapters. Or I can buy, you can actually buy the chassis that will support this as well, where you buy a chassis with USB connection, USB 3.2, and you plug in the drives into that, and now you can access them with that USB connection. Good. Okay, any other questions we got tonight? Going to run out with the pair of vice grips and go tighten all those connectors down, Wayne, before he shows up?
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, though, because I'll let him.
Ed, on the OMV, the creator of that also creates Zuma OS, which is a dead install OS. You don't have to have like Debian or something like that first, or Ubuntu, and put OMV on top of it.
Yeah, because it's mostly a layered app that sits on top of a base OS.
Right.
Yes. So if you don't have one, it'll install Debian, but you have this other one, Zumo.
It's called ZUMA OS. Same creator of OMV.
Media Vault.
And you might want to look at CASA OS.
KASA?
No, CASA OS.
Okay.
I started playing with those around the beginning of the year, but I got sidetracked and so tied up with other stuff I haven't touched them in a while. But I do have a OMV up, and I also have a CASA OS up, and I spent quite a bit of time figuring out how to make them shut off at a prescribed time, like we'll say 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the evening, and then turn on the next day when I want it to set up. And
Okay.
took quite a while, but I got both of them to work.
Well, you would have to do the startup in the BIOS, right?
No,
You'd have to set a timer in the BIOS to be able to power up at a given time. So they would just go into a deep suspend mode instead?
No, what they do is they physically shut off, and
Okay.
they will turn back on at the specified time. And
Which is, like I
it's
said,
going
that is through the BIOS that
it's
lets you
going
do that, right?
through the 12 o'clock a.m. That was a big headache to get it to turn on the next day. But I got past it. I've got both of them doing exactly that. They'll shut down when I'm going to bed, and they'll turn on around the time I get up, or I'm ready after I've had breakfast.
And if they power up and they get a blue screen, will they reboot for you?
I haven't gotten a blue screen yet.
Okay, well, I don't know what Linux does for those kind of errors. It just gives fatal error number 5 and stops processing all of the stuff in the startup script.
All I know is so far I've had no problem because the very next day I'm able to get right back into them, and everything's hunky dory because it's a controlled shutdown and a controlled startup.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think what I found on OMV will work. It's easier on OMV and probably on Zuma, but Casio is different. That one, because it's a layered system, you have to use cron. So if cron is not there, you have to install cron first, and then you can use a cron command to do the same effective thing in OEM and in probably Zuma too.
Yeah, but cron is something that cron table is originally from Unix anyway. So
Right,
that as long as you can put it the right way in the cron table, you're good.
right. But it works, so I've got it.
Okay, cool. Now, once you got it doing this, what do you have it running? Are you going to have it running your
Right,
server stuff or?
right now, nothing because I had to get off that project and onto too much other stuff. I'm hoping one of these millennia I can get back to the two damn things so I can continue figuring them out and getting them up and doing some real work.
Okay, all right. I mean, if it had to fire up and, I mean, there's one thing that I should consider. I want to consider figuring out how I can migrate it. I have a application that's running on it. It's supported up through Windows 10. I don't know if it'll run on Windows 11 yet or not. But we have this application called Church Bells at our church, and it has pre-captured handbell and chimes that are recorded in various songs or whatever. And you can set it up to play a particular tune and a bell count on the hour, quarter hour, 3/4 hour, anytime you want. But we have ours only going twice a day at noon and at 6 p.m. and then playing the particular songs. But it's running on an old Windows 7 laptop. And for the most part, it just keeps on working all the time until someday it stops working. I mean, this laptop was long in the tooth in 2013, and it's been going strong for about the last 5 years or so. And I want to think about, well, it'd be nice to be able to either move it to a Raspberry Pi, but the Church Bells program is an exe file that runs under Windows, and I'm pretty sure it was Visual Basic, okay, or at least some sort of basic program that was done with its own peculiarities. I have the sound files are separate. Um, they're standard files that I can, MP3s, I think, that I could play if I wanted to. And I wanted to write my own app and try and figure out, okay, is it time to play this? Is it scheduled to play this? Are you enabled to play this? All that kind of stuff. And I thought about, well, can I put this on a Raspberry Pi? I can. The audio may not be the best audio coming out of a Raspberry Pi as opposed to, but I thought about, well, I can plug in a USB to audio interface, and then tap that out and use that to play the audio instead of the bit banging it's doing on a Raspberry Pi. But it's another work in progress.
Well, as far as if it works on 10, it'll work on 11, even if you have to use compatibility mode. I'll bet you.
Well, that's what I would have to do because it's not running on 10 right now. I'm assuming it's supposed to run on 10. But I thought, oh, do I get a mini PC running Windows 11 and put that into the spot where it's currently at? Or do I try and port this to something with a headless server so I can just access it via the network whenever I want to do anything or check its console log or something to that effect? And then, okay, you're fine. You're doing well. Because I don't want to have to put a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor in the same room, which is basically it's in a heated space, but there's no place for heat to go. So the more power you pull out of this thing, the hotter it gets. So, and I don't currently switch the amplifier on and off, which is something that if I had the right connection and you would plug it in on the parallel port, and it would basically control, as a line printer port would control the switch on and off for the amplifier. Thought about doing that, but right now the amplifier stays on all the time, so I'm using some watts there.
You might be able to
But
use
high class problem.
You might be able to work up an interface with a parallel port for the amp and figure out how to interface that to USB.
Yeah, if I have something like a Pi or any one of those things, like a USB interface to parallel, yes, I can pick up one of those too, or even use a serial USB connection and just raise one of the control lines, and that could enable it, turn it off. But it has to interface. See, the application right now, I don't have access to the source code, so I can't control when it's going to turn on and turn off. It's going to try and turn on a logical line printer port, enable a port, turn off a port. So if I have something that mimics that line printer port on the right address, then yes, that would work. So they don't have a USB connection that would turn that on and off. So if I want to re-engineer it and do the whole thing myself, that's one thing.
You got nothing else to do. You're retired.
Yeah, I've heard that line before. Yeah, retired means you're busier. That's what it means. It means you're even busy.
You're not kidding on the busier.
So have you run out posted the CCS flyers in your local library already, Tim?
I would have to walk there.
You would have to walk.
I don't have operational wheels right now.
Oh, that's a shame. My library happens to be sort of landlocked with some construction, with Route 14 being cut down to one lane in both directions near that area. So it's not a place I want to go near right now.
Well, in some libraries too, and they'll put it up for 1 month and then they take it down, and you have to go back and repeat it again and again.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. So.
My library is Schaumburg, second largest in the state of Illinois.
What's the largest? Chicago?
Chicago, yeah. But Chicago's, what, 2 million plus people? Schaumburg's under 80,000.
Yeah, but there's more than one branch of the Chicago Library. There's not just one for two.
3 branches. Schaumburg has 2 more branches.
Okay, all right. See what things like Woodfield Shopping Center does for you?
Well, one of the few shopping malls with a waiting list to get in for stores.
Yeah. They had the opportunity over at Spring Hill Mall, but I think it's gone now.
Yeah.
It got taken over by the village of Dundee, and now it's no longer as we expected it. Yeah.
Well, the one in Bloomingdale's been demolished, so.
pile of rubble.
Yeah, they tore the whole thing down.
Ah, amazing, 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 amazing. So any suggestions for future meetings? I'll make the claim now and say, okay, anybody got an idea, something they would like to look?
I can think of a couple.
Okay,
Streaming music services. Uh,
all right.
is an interesting one. I have right now Spotify. Before that, I had Apple Music. Before that, I had Google Music. Uh, I there's Pandora, of course.
Yeah.
But just how is it? How well it works, or your choices, or what other
Oh,
kinds of things?
well, they're different bit rates.
Mhm.
For instance, Tidal, which I subscribe to on occasion, has the highest bit rate. They actually have a master mode where they stream off the original masters.
Did you say it was Hybel?
Tidal, Tidal,
Tidal.
like a tidal wave.
Okay. Highest bit rate.
Interesting.
I know that none of them can approach yeah, the full range of an old vinyl record. And I don't even think they even get to CD quality, do they?
Yeah, well, again, yeah, they do, but Tidal, as I said, takes them off the original master, which is highest
Okay.
bit rate possible. They're more expensive, and they have a high-end plan that lets you get those bit rates to be able
Uh,
to do that.
okay. That's one possibility. Any others, guys?
And of course, the
Anything you run?
flip of that is the video services as well, which you've got.
Yeah.
I don't know how you keep track right now of all the video services. So
Well, I was looking at some of these things that are currently offered. Like I got a flyer in the mail today pushing Hulu plus Disney plus Hulu, Disney, ESPN combo plus live channels, 85 live channels. No, 70 something, 75 live channels. And it was like 80 some odd dollars per month. Yes.
just to say with that, you're all user group people, so you probably already know this, but but every year Hulu does a deal around Black Friday. I've done it for the last 3 years for $2.99 a month.
Just for Hulu itself or any of the.
It used to be for $1 more a month, you could get Disney Plus also. And I had that. And being Disney, Disney doesn't care about you. So they just said, we're dropping that. You've got to get it separate. We'll give you your money back on the difference. They didn't even let you wait out the year that you paid for. It was just, sorry, we decided we don't want to do that.
Uh,
So they don't do it that way anymore. But there's a Hulu deal. And if you're like me, you do that with privacy.com, lock it in at the $3 a month so it can't go up from there.
okay. Oh, privacy.com? What is, I'm not sure. How,
Privacy.com, which I've used for years, it lets you create this credit card numbers. And each number you can set a one-time use. You can lock it to one company. You can lock it to so much a month or so much ever.
uh-huh.
which is
So
really good
how does
these
it keep
days.
it from going up, or because they can't? It's a different. You look
So,
like a different user.
you're generating a different credit card. The way they
Okay.
know you is from your credit card number and your email address. It's easy to generate email addresses. I use my own domain. So it's like when I
Yeah.
did I just put a year on it. So USA Today right now is USA Today 2024 because it's overlapping from last year at Bratkovich.com. And it was
Okay.
a dollar for a year. The year before
Okay.
it was USA Today 2023 at Bratkovich.com.
How much is
I know that.
privacy.com?
Privacy.com is free if you connect it and use it from your checking account. It's pay if you want to take it with a credit card to them, because then they're credit card fees.
Yeah.
If they take it out of your checking, they don't have those fees, and it's free for up to 6 transaction generations, not transaction generated numbers a month. And I've never come close to that, so it's never been a problem.
Have you seen the Google offering to convert your saved credit card information into a virtual credit card?
I'm not sure what you're asking. I use Google Wallet, but
Yeah, Google Wallet. If Google Wallet, prior to this, Google, you could save a credit card in, and it would automatically populate in Chrome if you wanted to, and then you put in the last piece of information that it would continue the transaction. But it just started saying, "Oh, do you want to put this in your Google Wallet and have a virtual card?" So it would
well,
generate a new number each time you used it.
it does give you some security with that, and then you can tap your phone, assuming your phone supports NFC. My old Motorola didn't, so you couldn't do that. The Pixel phone, though, does. And you can just tap that directly to a display. It does
Yeah,
give you a little added security in that the number is not being shared. On the other hand, almost pretty much every credit card company credit card is limited to liability to at most $50, and most of them
I
won't
know.
even hold you to the $50. So
If you said I'd use this valid, and they'll usually eat the charge, unless, like I said, it's an international fee. International, your mileage will definitely vary.
well, I mean, mileage. My United card doesn't charge for foreign transaction fees.
Uh, well, no, I protested a charge because I wanted to reverse the fee that they charged me for my taxi drive in Moscow when they dropped me off at the wrong address. And the card that we were using at the time did not want to go to bat for us on that. I was still a company charge, so it wasn't me personally, but just the idea. They didn't even get me to the right spot. Why should they get paid? Pull that money back in rubles, big rubles.
Yeah, of course, there's no good way to do that because you can't prove you were taken to the wrong address, and
Um,
people could use that just as a way to avoid charges. So I sort of get both sides of that. Didn't you tell the driver that well, I don't know if he spoke English much, but
the driver did not speak English, and I said, "This is Motorola, right?" Yes, and it turned out to be the VA for the Russian army. Yes, I was dropped off 3 blocks away from the Kremlin.
Whoa.
I should have been about a mile west of there. Yes, but I didn't know where I was supposed to be going in the first place. I was just told, "Oh, he's going to drop you off here." "Oh, we're not going to the other airport?" "Okay, fine." And I had to convince one of the people there who was the senior analyst for the VA of the Russian army to take me in his car and drop me off at the domestic airport, which is 45 kilometers southwest of Moscow. I actually made my plane fight. But again, the domestic airport in Moscow is kind of a precious little place. The doors are open even in the middle of winter. There's armed guards there with shouldered arms. There's dogs walking in and out. There's pigeons flying through. And you walk in there and nothing is in English. It's all in Cyrillic. So I needed to go to Rostov, Rostov. How is it spelled in Cyrillic? Poctob.
These days you can use your phone and just hold it up and translate. Those days in the past you didn't have that.
If it wanted to work in Moscow when I was there, you had to have, it was a GSM phone, and I didn't have a GSM phone with me.
Yeah, I get
And
it. The only problem is, no, go ahead.
You would have been arrested as a spy.
Yeah, that's the other concern with holding out a phone.
6 months after I was in Rostov-on-Don, that Qualcomm engineer was caught with a GPS device next to a bridge, and he was arrested as a spy. It's likely I walked over some of the same bridges that he was using. I didn't happen to have a GPS device, so I was okay. Yes, but that's another story. Okay, I think we've run to the end of our time. I guess I will shut down the recording here. All right, let's see. Here it is. Stop recording.
Recording.
Yes.